everyone. Welcome to Wine Simplified, a wine podcast for cork dorks and those who want to be. I am your host, Carrie, also known as Winecita. That is the name of my blog and website. I am a WSET Level 3 certified wine educator with a background in education and a passion for all things vino. I currently serve as the wine lead at the Good Pour Wine and Spirits Marketplace in Longwood, Florida. The store isn't a sponsor of this podcast or affiliated with it, but if you happen to find yourself in the area, please stop by and say hello. So let's get started. Hi everyone, welcome back to Wine Simplified. If you've made it to episode 3 and listened to the first 2 episodes, you'll know that I was kind of starting very, very basic. What is wine, which we know is now the fermented grape juice from Vitis vinifera. How does fermentation work? What's the process from vine to bottle? Today, I want to take some of that foundational knowledge and kind of zoom back a little bit, expand the view, because the world of wine is incredibly diverse. Obviously, with all of the thousands of great varieties, styles, regions, it is just a very overwhelming topic. And I see that every day at my store when customers are like, I don't know where to start. But here is a little secret, or to make it seem a little bit simpler, despite the ocean of options out there, nearly every wine that you'll encounter falls into at least 9 foundational styles. So if you are at all familiar with the Wine Spirit Education Trust, which is one of the international leading organizations in wine education and what I studied under, they will use the vocabulary of types of wine. So a type of wine will typically refer to the broad categories like red, white, rosé, sparkling, fortified, sweet. And I'm going to touch on those today as a type of wine, but also style. So styles, on the other hand, are based on characteristics like body, tannin, sweetness, acidity. So that's what I'm going to focus on today is style. And within the umbrella of the various types as well. But there's essentially 9 different styles. I used an analogy last week that I borrowed from Elizabeth Schneider, Wine for Normal People, great podcast, about the structure of a wine, and that being, thinking of the canvas as the masterpiece and the structure being that wood frame that goes around it, the body, the acidity, the alcohol. So using another analogy or furthering that art analogy, you think about learning these styles and types as learning your primary colors before you paint a masterpiece. Once you recognize these styles, you will start seeing patterns and can become more confident with the vocabulary of wine, with ordering of wine, with purchasing of wine, or even telling your friends or anybody else about wine. So let's get started with all of that intro being said. First and foremost, I'm going to talk about sparkling wine, often a showstopper, known for celebrations, being very bubbly. So these wines first became popular in France and really are synonymous with regions like Champagne. Note that it can only be called Champagne if the grapes in the wine are produced in the Champagne region. And making sparkling wine is really one of the most technically challenging and time-intensive types of wine that can be made in the world. They are incredibly popular, as I said, for celebratory occasions, for giving as a gift, but they're also really refreshing. The bubbles are kind of a natural palate cleanser. So while champagne can be price restrictive, they have, lower volume. They still are pretty high volume, but less acreage than some other regions. They've got quite the markup. Their land is expensive. So most champagnes are going to be on the higher end of the price scale. You can look for brut level. Not going to get into the sweetness right now because after this overview, I will be doing longer episodes on each specific type and style. So while champagne can be expensive, you can look for brut level, B-R-U-T, sparklers like Cava, one of my favorites, Prosecco, or Cremants. Cremants go, often people don't know about them or what they are, but Cremant de Loire, Cremant d'Alsace, very similar methods as what is done in Champagne, but just in other parts of France that are not Champagne. So these, usually made in the traditional method, will offer notes of toast, light berry, citrus, and peach. Sparkling wines get that fizz, get that bubble from a second fermentation that happens in the bottle and traps carbon dioxide. That is through the traditional method, which is the most famous method, what they do in Champagne when that second fermentation happens in the bottle. That adds complexity, toastiness, those real fine bubbles. Prosecco and some cheaper sparkling wines are usually made in a stainless steel tank. Some winemakers will pump carbon dioxide into kind of like think about a soda getting carbon dioxide pumped in. That can make a more affordable sparkling wine. I hate to say low bottom shelf wines, but typically that's how those are done. And there are some really great Proseccos out there. It just can be a little bit cheaper because they use a tank method. But again, I'm probably giving too many spoilers for my next episode. What you can try, if you want to go France, is try a non-vintage brut. Most sparklers are non-vintage. Try a non-vintage brut. You'll get classic like green apple, brioche, almond. Cava is from Spain. It's also a traditional method made with local grapes like Xarel-lo, Pareda. That will give you a lot of lemon zest, green pear, but you will get some nuttiness and some brioche just at a more affordable price point. Prosecco, really popular using that tank method. You get a lot more freshness, fruity, floral, white peach. And then, of course, those Cremants, those sparkling wines made outside of Champagne are always an excellent value. And really, you can pair sparkling wine. It is so versatile. It goes great with fried foods because the acidity and the bubbles will kind of cut some of the greasiness and the fat. Obviously, oysters, sushi, anything light like that. Even popcorn, because it can cut through the saltiness, works great as an aperitif before your meal or as a dessert because it is so easy to pair just because you get a lot of versatility due to those bubbles. Spent a lot more time on sparkling wine than I intended to, and probably we'll get some of that repeated in the next episode. But next we're going to go into light-bodied white wines. So these white wines are crisp. They're the refreshing wines that you would drink cold on a really hot day, usually very mouth-watering, zesty, kind of like the light beers in summer. It's kind of like the beer of the wine world, I guess. So typically these wines are a little lighter than in alcohol, high in acidity, often unoaked. So think Sauvignon Blanc, perhaps from the Loire Valley, France, or Marlborough, New Zealand. You'll get a lot of like grass, lime, gooseberry, Albarino or Alvarinho if you're in Portugal, Albarino if you're in Spain. One of my favorites, real salty sea breeze meets peach and citrus. If you're having seafood, it's just a great pairing. Gruner Veltliner. This is white pepper, lime, green apple. Look for one out of Austria. And you get some nice herbaceous notes. Pinot Grigio, light-bodied, easy drinking. I feel like some people think, it's just a big party wine. It's cheap. Look for those from Alto Adige. A little bit more intensity, a little bit more complex. But Pinot Grigio is fantastic, especially when it's hot out. These wines are they are meant to be drunk young. These are not going to be age-worthy. So drink them, enjoy them, get refreshment out of them. Go great with light cheeses like goat cheese, like pasta dishes, or real vegetable-based meals. It's time to take a quick detour to my smart buy of the week or something new to try. And this week's pick is one of my summer favorites. I know I've done a lot of white wines. The last 3 smart buys have been white. This one is a white. I will get into reds eventually. But Vinho Verde from Portugal. It's light, it's crisp, it's a little spritzy, usually can be found for under $15. Now, Vinho Verde isn't a grape. It's a region, and it's typically a blend of some local Portuguese grapes like Loureiro, Orinto, Alvarinho. And it's really a fantastic value for everyday drinking. Vinho Verde means green wine. Green wine doesn't indicate anything about the color. It just means that it's about the use of the wine, the youngness of the wine, the freshness of the wine. These wines are definitely not meant for aging. These are meant to be enjoyed now, young and fresh. They're really zippy, low in alcohol, usually around 9 to 11%. You can look for producers like Broadbent, Quinta de Valeda, Casal Garcia. These are consistently awesome crowd pleasers with versions that have just great balance, a signature small touch of effervescence. And so they are fantastic if you're maybe wanting to have a glass of wine a little earlier in the day. In Portugal, they will do it as a lunch wine, which is fun. Or you can pair it really well with shrimp tacos, ceviche, sushi, salty snacks, great for porch sipping, sharing with friends who say, I don't know what kind of wine I like. I've had customers that are sweet wine lovers that like this wine and dry wine lovers that love this wine. So if you're looking for something new, I definitely would suggest getting your hands on a Vino Verde. Now let's get back to it. Next are our full-bodied white wines. So these are wines that really have some heft to them. So if you are a red wine drinker, a big, bold red wine drinker wanting to try white wine, this is probably going to be more familiar to you in terms of viscosity and heaviness and weight. They're creamy, they're textured. These wines are typically aged in oak, so they add a little bit more oomph to it, that cream, butter, vanilla, a little bit more richness. Kind of think about oak aging like an aged whiskey. It just makes it a little bit smoother. So these wines generally have moderate to higher alcohol, but often with a little bit lower acidity and more of a round, rich texture. They'll also undergo things like malolactic fermentation. That's when you take that, think about the malic acid that's in an apple, that tartness, and turning it into lactic acid, which is like milk. So that's basically what malolactic fermentation does, and it really softens out that acidity level. So you can try Chardonnay, especially California Chardonnays. They are generally, a little bit more oaky and heavier, still delicious ones out of California. Burgundy, a little bit less oaky, but still got weight to it. Australia, fantastic Chardonnays coming out of there. That's apple, pineapple, vanilla, butter. Now, this grape really does depend on the winemaker and where it's from. We can talk more about that when I do the full-bodied white wine episode. Viognier, a fantastic aromatic grape, rich and floral. Viognier is typically actually not oaked, but that real intensity on the palate and in the aromas can add weight to it. So I love a good Viognier. Northern Rhone is a great region to look. They do produce it in California. Sometimes it's blended. And then we have Semillons, another one very similar if you wanted something a little bit Chardonnay adjacent. Kind of got a waxy texture, which I know doesn't sound good, but it's delicious. Citrus peel, it can be age worthy. Semillon can age. And it does have some nutty complexity. So these are great with like roast chicken, mushroom risotto, creamy pastas, or, salmon. And so if you want to kind of start exploring, the classic choice is Chardonnay. Now we're going to move into some of our aromatic white wines. These wines can be bold, expressive, floral, fruity, spicy. They can taste with they have a touch of sweetness, even if they're made to be dry. For example, Riesling. Love Riesling. Everybody assumes it's sweet. It's just a very versatile grape. It can range from dry to sweet, depending on how it's made. I've mentioned that in a previous episode. Gewürztraminer. Alsace will be typically a little drier than a German one, but you get a lot of like rose petal, lychee, ginger. They are bold. They are delicious. They go great with spicy food. Torrontés, floral nose, a dry finish, kind of like a Sauvignon Blanc meets a Muscat. These are aromatic white wines, and typically they won't be oaked because they are so aromatic that, you don't want to kind of cover that up with oak. Moscato, fizzy sweets, low alcohol, real popular for beginning wine drinkers who are used to some sweetness or sugar. They're great for dessert wines. These wines are generally made from some of the oldest grape varieties. They're really explosive, almost kind of great perfumed aromas. It's fact or fiction, I'm not sure, but the word on the street is that Cleopatra really loved her Muscat of Alexandria. So it goes back to ancient Egypt times, which is really cool. But they can you can feel like you get a little bit touch of sweetness on the palate, even if they are dry, just because of that acidity and those aromatics and just the intensity of that. But these wines are great with Indian cuisine to really balance out the spiciness, real pungent cheeses, spicy fish dishes. You get a really nice balance between spice and heat and these wines. And of course, I frankly love a Riesling just on its own. Now let's go with rosé. Summer is the season of rosé, I guess. Great for Mother's Day, brunches, all of those good things. Rosé wines are typically dry to off-dry. They're light in body, driven by crisp acidity. A lot of people will think rosé is sweet if you do a white zin or something like that. Of course, those are generally sweet, but honestly, a lot of rosé, most rosés typically dry to off dry, especially Provence style rosé. They're really, really pale, really elegant, generally using Grenache, Cinsault, Mourvedre grapes. Spanish Rosado is another one. They'll use Garnacha, which is the same grape as Grenache, but they call it Garnacha in Spain. Or they can be Tempranillo based. These can be a little brighter and fuller bodied. And my favorite Pinot Noir Rosé out of Oregon. These are fresh, vibrant. They get some tart cherry, some citrus. There are multiple different methods that are used in making a rosé. So when we get to the rosé episode, I will go a little bit more deep into that. But if you want to try a rosé, I definitely say try Provence or a Pinot Noir rosé out of Oregon. These go great with charcuterie, poolside snacks, especially if you get a screw top, grilled chicken, Caesar salads, light vegetables, all those perfect things that you eat in the summer. But you can have rosé year round. You don't have to be a purist in that way. Now let's get into our reds. So a light-bodied red. So these reds are generally all about freshness, a little bit lighter in color, lower in tannin. Nice if you put a slight chill on them. So these wines, you can typically see if you're looking down into your glass with a stem, you can generally see through them into the stem. They have very, very light tannins, which just as a reminder, tannins what creates that astringent, mouth-drying sensation. And because they're lighter in tannin, these wines won't age as long. Now, a great Pinot Noir that is really well structured does have age worthiness for sure, especially ones out of Burgundy. But these light red wines are usually really fruit forward. So Pinot Noir, I already spoiled it, is a real classic example. But if you like that, try other regions like Beaujolais, where Gamay is the main grape of Beaujolais. It is a region in France, very underrated, but also very food friendly. These wines are a little bit higher in acid. You can also try Pinotage or real young Zinfandels. But you're going to get fresh berries and some herbal notes. They go great with things that have some umami oomph to them, like mushroom dishes, lentil stews, also roast poultry. So my go-to is a well-structured Beaujolais at Thanksgiving with my roast turkey. Then we move into our medium-bodied red wines. I like to say these are the Swiss Army knives of red wine. They are balanced, they're very food-friendly, they're very versatile. So they have that balance of zesty acidity and also flavor profiles that just go with a wide variety of foods. So if you are a red wine lover, this will be kind of like your midweek drinker. So there is a wide variety in this category. Grenache, Sangiovese, Merlots, some styles of Zinfandel, some styles of I can speak today. Montepulcianos, Cab Francs, Barberas out of Italy, Carmenere out of Chile. You can get some stone fruit notes. You can get plum, cherry, ripe berries, real earthy flavors that go great with cured meat. I love Cab Francs, especially ones out of like the Finger Lake region. Sangiovese out of Italy, they obviously make their wine to just go with food. So you can get even some tomato leaf on those that pair really well with spaghetti meatballs or lasagna. But generally, these are moderate tannins, medium acidity, real well-rounded fruit-forward profile. Then we have kind of the king style of wines. These are your full-bodied red wines, your bold reds. These ones are high in tannin, full of flavor, great with rich foods. These are the deepest, darkest, most tannic of all red wines. So while tannin can dry your mouth, as we just talked about, that astringency, it can bind to proteins in your saliva, not to be gross, but that provides a real palate cleansing effect. So these can stand alone as a cocktail wine. You've probably tried or want to try, if you're into this, like Syrah, Shiraz, Cab Sauv, Cabernet Sauvignon, Malbecs, Montepulciano. Like I said, some styles can be medium bodied. Some styles, depending on winemaking methods, can be bolder. Same with Zinfandels and Pinotage, all classic examples. So these can be bold, intense, big flavors. Think tobacco, cedar, black currant, black pepper, cherries. Now, mind you, these aromas are just examples. You won't get all of these aromas out of all of these varietals, but this is that overview that I was talking about. These wines generally can benefit from some aging or breathing in the glass. So if you want to, you can decant, especially if it's an older one. But, letting these breathe will open up those flavor notes and those aromatics as well. Steak, barbecue, chili, aged cheddar all really go well because they're bold enough to stand up to these bold wines. And then last but not least, dessert wines. These were less popular now than in the 1800s when they were highly sought after. So back then, these were huge. But right now, they're not as popular, but they're still some of the boldest, most intensely flavored and aromatic wines in the world. They range from dry to sweet. Some can be almost this, kind of getting you that thickness of like maple syrup. But most all dessert wine is going to be on the sweeter side. Sauterne style wine or a late harvest white wine. Riesling, a late harvest Riesling is a great dessert wine. These are really good ones to start with. You can try a port. Ports are going to be much higher in alcohol because they are fortified, but you can try Madeiras, sherries, Marsalas. Those are going to be much more intense and concentrated. But if you really want to start with something, try a late harvest Riesling, a late harvest Chard, anything labeled late harvest, or a Sauternes, which is just naturally sweet because it uses something called botrytis or noble rot, which doesn't sound good, but it makes for a delicious dessert wine. These are real high sugar content, and they're often balanced by acidity. And so I definitely would always, love to have a couple ounces of a dessert wine with my apple pie. Again, going back to my Thanksgiving dinner or, a cheesecake or something like that. So deep breath, that was a lot. That was an overview of all the 9 different types and styles of wine. But this is kind of a roadmap for exploring the world of wine. And in upcoming episodes, I'm going to go through each of these a little bit more in depth so that we can continue scaffolding this overwhelming world, on up. So starting with the very, very basics and getting a little bit deeper with each episode. So thanks for sticking with me. Please like, share, comment if you found this useful, and I hope to see you next time.